Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles, and fair warning, well in advance, this is probably going to be an interesting video for me to make. And it's going to be quite difficult making videos over the course of the next couple of days because little Akizuki has just come back from the vet where she's had the snip. And I pretty much have to look after her full time while she's still groggy from the anaesthetic. And then when she recovers from that, making sure that she doesn't get too excited, which is going to be easier said than done with an 18-week-old kitten, so she doesn't pull her stitches out. Right now she's going crazy trying to kill one of her chew toys. So if you hear kitten noises in the background of any videos that I put up over the course of the next week or so, it's largely unavoidable. Anyway, what do we have for you today? Well, this is Hyperweapon in the Japanese Tier 9 battleship, the Izumo. Long regarded as a bit of a meme as far as terrible ships are concerned, and yet, while it still hasn't really been able to shake off its terrible reputation, the Izumo is actually a pretty good ship these days. It used to have paper armour, particularly the deck and the superstructure, which just meant that it chewed huge amounts of high explosive damage. Anti-aircraft guns, fairly terrible. Main battery guns, hopelessly unreliable and inaccurate. This thing would have struggled to hit the side of a barn from the inside. And yet over the course of the last year or so, just about every patch has had some kind of small... Oh, hello. Did you hear that? Just about every patch has announced some kind of small buff to the Izumo. And over a long enough period of time, cumulatively, those buffs have turned this ship into a pretty solid Tier 9 battleship. I've no doubt that anybody who started playing World of Warships within the last 6 months or so will be scratching their heads in puzzlement and saying, what do you mean? The Izumo's bad? No, it's a decent ship. It is a decent ship. Anybody who's been playing the game longer than that will probably remember just how terrible this ship was. Not all of the weaknesses that the Izumo featured are gone, however. That triple turret arrangement with all of the main battery guns mounted in the front, it's still there, it hasn't gone anywhere. The reason that's a weakness... There she is again. I see a little kitten who wants my attention. Hang on a second. Okay, I'm back. She's having some food, she's calmed down. Anyway, that triple turret arrangement, it's one of the Izumo's strengths, but it's also kind of one of the Izumo's weaknesses, because it means it's got no firepower to the rear. And if it wants to fire to a target to the rear, it has to expose an uncomfortable amount of broadside in order to do so. The strength, of course, is that firing at targets at the front means that you don't have to expose as much broadside as you would if you were in a ship that had a third or fourth turret at the rear. However, the firing arcs of that third turret are not particularly great, and you do still have to be very careful about angling the ship sufficiently to get that third turret firing at a target even to your front. Also, the clearance to the front on that third turret is very awkward. It's not like the Nelson, where the turret can sweep left or right and track targets in exactly the same way as the two turrets at the front. If you're in the Nelson and you're engaging a target 15 degrees off the port bow, you can get all three guns firing at it. And then if you suddenly have to switch to a target 15 degrees off the starboard bow, all three turrets simply have to rotate 30 degrees in the other direction. Not so on the Izumo. That third turret has to go the long way around. So, yeah, that third turret. I mean, an extra 3 406mm guns, or possibly 410mm on the Izumo, I'm not entirely sure. Not that it makes that much of a difference. They're nice to have, but the turret arrangement, kind of awkward. Not quite as flexible as the similar but different arrangement on the Nelson, or the Russian Premium Tier 8, the Lenin, or as I like to call it, the Nelsky. You know, it's just occurred to me, I don't think I've even introduced the person playing the Izumo for us today. If so, I'm very sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is Hyperweapon, playing the Japanese Tier 9 battleship, the Izumo, today for your viewing entertainment. I am terrible sometimes. Anyway, very sorry about that. It's safe to say that Hyperweapon had a fairly slow start. I mean, he scored one fairly reasonable hit, but then, well, either RNG or his own aim started screwing him over. Take this shot at the Massachusetts, for example. unfortunately, severely overestimated just how fast the Massachusetts was going. Scored 1 over penetration, right through the bows, I think. Waiting for the guns to reload, going to have another go. And judging by the smoke coming from the ship's funnel, the Massachusetts is definitely accelerating. So, still got all 3 turrets lined up on the target, shots out. And this can be kind of frustrating. It happens all the time. Remember with the last salvo, he scored a single over penetration. And now he's doing exactly the same amount of damage with 2 hits. One of them an over penetration, and one of them a penetration. Apparently maths is really hard. What's actually happening? And this doesn't make it any less frustrating, because he was getting the damage for the over penetration, but the penetration was most likely just, for example, the torpedo bulge. There, and again, just 2 over penetrations. It's kind of frustrating when you see a penetrating hit pop up and yet you don't actually get any damage from it. What's happening is you're penetrating something that doesn't actually have any hit points, like, for example, the ship's torpedo bulge, and then not penetrating the actual belt armour behind it. Knowing why it's happening, of course, doesn't make it any less annoying when it happens, but, well, it is what it is. Shots out at the Neptune, and this time I think he's overcompensated just a little. Yep. Too much lead. Speaking of things that are frustrating, all of these targets sailing around giving broadside, and yet they don't seem to be getting punished for it. The Richelieu, for example. Another ship with all of its firepower in the front doesn't have to give broadside to fire, and yet is. Well, he's not going to get away with it for much longer. And of course, when he only has 13,000 health left, that's when you start scoring the citadels. Yeah, I know. Well, things are starting to perk up. And not just for Hyperweapon, but for his team as well. They're now in possession of 2 of the caps. And for a brief period of time, they were ahead on kills as well, but the enemy team have just managed to equalise. But it's not just the raw numbers, it's also the positions of the 2 teams. If you have a look at all of those ships that Hyperweapon is shooting at, look at their position on the map. They're all sailing around in open water. They've got no cover. Every time they fire, they're giving their positions away. And they're sailing around broadside on to absolutely everything. And yet somehow, they're not dying. Second salvo, out against the Neptune. Only this time it looks a lot better. Well, yeah, okay, maybe not. You see what I mean? Sometimes there's just no justice in the world, and then sometimes... well, that's more like it. But still, all of these targets, like the Seattle, which has now gone undetected, okay? The Neptune, just gone undetected. Let's try the San Luis, which has just gone undetected. All of these targets, given everybody flat broadsides, or as near as damn it to flat broadsides, when you're in a cruiser and somebody's shooting at you with a 16-inch gun, it doesn't really matter that much. And yet they're getting away with it, sailing around in open water. Let's try a look with the Neptune again. Now, this does look a lot better, and it is a lot better, and he was very, very lucky to even survive that. And of course, focus fire is the name of the game. Hyperweapon is requesting that everybody concentrate their fire on that Neptune, and you'd think that people would be keen to finish off a low health, extremely thinly armoured target, and yet he's still the only person shooting at him, even as the Neptune turns to give broadside again. Which has got to piss you off, knowing that if even one other ship on your team had scored a hit on that Neptune with that Citadel, he would be dead now. But they allowed him to recover some health, they allowed him to hide inside the smokescreen, and he's gotten away scot-free. He's now safe. Well, not entirely safe. You'll notice that Hyperweapon has now launched a spotter plane, giving him this elevated view. Now, he certainly doesn't need the additional range that the spotter plane gives him. What he's doing is, okay, he got unlucky, they missed, but the use of the spotter plane, the elevated view that the spotter plane gives you looking down into a smokescreen, helps a lot at estimating the position of any ships firing from within that smokescreen. It's not foolproof, and it doesn't help if the ship firing out of the smokescreen suddenly stops shooting, but it does help a lot. Now try this one on for size, since frustration appears to be the topic of today's video. Look at the position of the enemy team. I mean, I called attention to it before, but it bears repeating. Hyperweapon's team have all of the island cover. That big cluster of enemy ships down to the south are all sailing around in open water with no cover, no concealment, and are in fact caught in a crossfire between Hyperweapon's team's ships up here to the north and the rest of his team, who are barely holding on to the Bravo cap and have in fact just stabilised the position there down to the southwest. And yet, it's only now that Hyperweapon's team have managed to equalise the number of kills. And they're not that far ahead on points, despite holding the cap advantage for the majority of the game. Ah, there's our little friend in the Neptune. The Atlanta has moved down and pinged him with his radar, so he's been forced to evacuate his smoke screen. So this is a really dangerous moment for the Neptune, but then he goes and makes it worse by firing his guns. So he's going to stay detected now. Well, of course, Jingles, he has to kill the Atlanta. The Atlanta's the one spotting him with radar. The Atlanta was the one spotting him with radar, but the Atlanta's radar only lasts 20 seconds, and the Neptune was at the extreme limit of the radar's range in the first place. Now the Atlanta's spotting him visually, because he's firing his guns. The Atlanta's not going to go chasing after him. If he did, he would have to run into the Massachusetts, the San Luis, the enemy Izumo, and the Neptune, and if he did that, we're going to have a dead Atlanta. But the Neptune kept firing. It was a panic move, and that's what sealed his fate. So, yay, another kill. Except all Hyperweapon's actually done is equalise the kills that the enemy team have already scored, and the enemy team are in the process of taking back the only advantage that Hyperweapon's team have held on to for most of this game, the capture advantage. And they're still sailing around giving broadside, and not being punished for it. Until now. Finally. Kill number 3. He's really starting to rack up these citadels, but then so he should. He spent the entire game shooting at targets who think that Citadel is a company affiliated with Games Workshop that make miniature toy soldiers. Which is technically true, but it's also something that when you're playing World of Warships you should take great pains to avoid getting shot in wherever possible. Okay, the San Luis down there, sailing around in open water, showing broadside, but he's trying to get the hell out of there, so you can kind of forgive him for that. But not for the fact that he keeps firing his bloody guns. So he's now giving Hyperweapon a second opportunity to take a shot at a broadsiding cruiser. My one question at this point is, why is nobody else shooting at him? Because there was a Sovietsky Soyuz and a Monarch who were shadowing Hyperweapon down to the south here. Unfortunately, they diverted to the west into the cap circle at Bravo, and they both managed to get sunk. One of them by the enemy Izumo, and the other just a couple of seconds ago by a certain tier 8 Japanese destroyer that goes by the name of Akizuki. That's a really good name for a ship, isn't it? Somebody should maybe name one of their kittens after it. Oh, there she is. Now this was almost certainly a bit of a brown alert moment for Hyperweapon, but he has nothing to worry about because the Akizuki's torpedoes are on cooldown. Of course he didn't know that at the time. And I'm struggling to think whether or not the Akizuki thought this was actually going to be worth it. They did get the kill on the Ognavoy. That was the Akizuki's 4th kill in this game. But getting shot at by an Ognavoy, an Izumo's secondaries, and an Atlanta's primaries, I'm not entirely sure it was worth it. I mean, they're not that far ahead on kills that they can throw away ships, and yet that's basically exactly what he did. And then, after narrowly escaping death at the hands of the Akizuki, Hyperweapon is presented with a target like this. I don't know, I guess since the enemy team have just gotten comfortable with sailing around giving broadside because they haven't really been getting punished for it up until now. And bizarrely, the Izumo only has 9 guns. So quite how he managed to score 4 citadels and 6 penetrations on the enemy Izumo, I have no idea. I'm pretty sure that adds up to 10. I think the maths might be off there slightly. I don't know, maybe the game's just compensating him for all those broadsides he didn't citadel earlier. Going for the Seattle now. It's the safest target because now he is at a bit of a disadvantage. He's being pursued by the Seattle and the Lenin, with the San Luis peppering him with high explosive in the distance, although the San Luis is being harassed by the friendly Lexington. And there are a couple of reasons why he's going for the Seattle first. It's more likely that he's going to be able to kill the Seattle. And also, he doesn't have to expose quite as much broadside to engage the Seattle and get his guns firing, because he is firing to the rear, as he would if he was shooting at the Lenin. And he's robbed of the kill there. But now the Atlanta is getting in on the action. And even though I'm pretty sure the Atlanta does not have the IFHE skill, because he's not doing a huge amount of damage with each hit, he's doing enough to finish the Seattle off. And again, things could be very, very tricky for Hyperweapon here, because he is reversing after being run aground, but, well, he still has kind of an angle. And the Lenin, who is turning to avoid the torpedoes fired by the Mars, doesn't. And there's the Kraken Unleashed, to go with the high caliber and Confederate. Akazuki seems to approve of that kill. I don't know if you just heard her. And there she is again. Yes, that kill definitely has the Akazuki seal of approval. You kind of have to feel a certain amount of sympathy for the San Luis there, who's found himself in this unenviable situation twice now in this battle. Last ship left alive in a certain sector of the map, and forced to give broadside in order to turn away and get the hell out of there and attempt to find somebody else on the team that he can back up, but there doesn't really appear to be anybody else on the team left. Although he's probably going to win this fight with the Atlanta, who might have bitten off a little bit more than he could chew. Oh, then again, perhaps not. Kill number 6. Like I said, he's really racking up the citadels in this match. 2 enemy ships left alive. The Sovietsky Soyuz, the Tier 9 Soviet battleship, and of course the Lexington, because the carrier is always the last one left alive on the enemy team. In fact, is usually the only one that survives on the enemy team, because you spend so long chasing them into the map border that the timer runs down, and they always seem to get away with it. And in fact, spoiler alert, despite the tender ministrations of the enemy carrier, right after Hyperweapon finishes off the enemy Sovietsky Soyuz, claiming his 7th kill into the process and racking up 253,000 damage, to the great surprise of absolutely nobody, despite the fact that the Lexington was continuously spotted for the entire last minute and a half of the battle while under constant attack from 3 ships. He did in fact lead them on a merry chase all the way to the map border, and was the last ship surviving on the enemy team because the timer ran out. So Hyperweapon was denied his 8th kill, and is just going to have to settle for his 858,000 credits earned, nearly 255,000 damage, 7 kills, devastating strike, Confederate, Kraken Unleashed, and high caliber. And I suspect he probably isn't complaining too much. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.